And now we start Daf Dalid Omid Al. The Gemara goes back to the din of Lishma, which we said Lechatchila, the Shchita and all the Avodos, that means Kabbalas Adam and Halachas Adam and Zrikas Adam, all of those require Lishma, that the Machshavas HaKohen has to be for that Zevach. Minolan to be Inon, Zvicha, Lishma. What is the source for the halacha that the avodos have to be Lishma? First we'll start with Zvicha, which is Shchita. The Amakra, the Pasuk says in Vayikra Gimel with regard to Shlomim, V'im Zevach Shlomim Karbano, Shetei Zvicha L'Shem Shlomim. So the word Zevach is interpreted as Zvicha, meaning Shchita, and it's got to be Shlomim. That it's got to be a Shchita L'Shem Shlomim. Frekta Gemara V'Dilma Hainu Shmamayu. How do you know that the word Zevach here means Shchita? Maybe the word Zevach is just a description that goes together with the word Shlomim. That the Torah never uses the word Shlomim itself, by itself. It'll always be Zevach Shlomim. So therefore you have no proof here with regard to Zvicha, with regard to Shchita. And the Gemara answers, I'll show you where the Torah calls Shlomim Shlomim without adding the prefix of Zevach. B'dechsiv, elsewhere in Vayikra Perek Zayin, it says Hamakriv es dam hashlomim. It doesn't say Zevach hashlomim, it says Shlomim. Or, for example, in that same chapter, it says Hazorik es dam hashlomim. Lo ksiv Zevach. So therefore, the Torah did not have to add the word Zevach Shlomim, and therefore the word Zevach has to be interpreted as Zvicha Shchita, v'hocha ksiv Zevach shma minus te Zvicha l'shem Shlomim. Frek Gemara Ashkechan l'Zvicha shar vodos minola. I'm going to prove to you that maybe the Torah is more machmir with regard to Shchita than it is with regard to the three other avodos of Kabbalah, Holacha, and Zrika. I'll show you how there's a chumrah in Zvicha that doesn't apply to the other avodos. Shekain posela shalo l'shem ochlin v'pesach. Okay, so this we once learned way back in Maseches Pesachim, in the second half of that with regard to Shchitas HaPesach, it's got to be l'shem ochlin. So let's say, for example, you have a chole or a zaken who cannot eat the basar Pesach, and the Kohen shechted the carbon Pesach for the sake of the chole or the zaken. The Pesach is possible, and that's a special halach that only applies to zvicha, to shchita. If, for example, he did the Kabbalah, the halacha, or the zrika l'shem chole or l'shem zaken, then the Pesach is kosher. So you see that there's a special chumrah in Shechita. And it's very fascinating that the sugya we're about to embark upon is going to give us like an overview of all four avodos in all their ramifications. And if you're looking for a chumrah in Shechita that doesn't apply to any other avodah, it comes dafka from Korban Pesach. So therefore, we're back to square one, and we still don't know, how do we know that you need lishma not only in Shechita, but also in the other three avodos? Ela makra hamakriv is dam hashlomim. Oh, so here the Torah used the word hamakriv. Now the word hamakriv, in its shorish, in its root, comes from the idea of bringing something close, and it does not refer to Shechita, but rather to Kabbalas Hadam, and you're going to bring the dam now closer to the Mizbeach. So that's called Hamakriv. And it says Shlomim. Hamakriv is dam HaShlomim. Shetehei Kabbalah L'Shem Shlomim. That this word Hamakriv referring to Kabbalah has to be L'Shem Shlomim. Frek Gemara, if that be the case, lift over Rahman of Kabbalah Leilach Shchita Minei. Shchita, he said, is even more chomer. So if in Kabbalah you have to have Lishma, then that requirement would certainly with a Kal V'chomer apply to Shchita. Why did the Torah have to spell it out in Shchita with the words Zevach shlomim. And there's a chumrah that applies to Kabbalas Adam that does not apply to Shechita. And that's a double chumrah. Number one, if a non-Kohen would be Makabal Adam, it passes the carbon. Number two, if a woman would be Makabal Adam, it passes the carbon. With regard to Shechita, a woman could do the Shechita, and a non-Kohen could do the Shechita. So maybe the Torah wants to tell me that a machshava l'shma is a requirement after Kabbalah, because Kabbalas Adam is more chomer than Shechita. So the Gemara says, okay, fine. Now we have justified two psukim. We have a Zevach Shlomim to teach me the Shechita has to be l'shma, and we have a Makar V'Zdama Shlomim to teach me that the Kabbalah has to be l'shma. Ashkan l'shchita Kabbalah zrika minola and v'chitem nelif minay. Why not derive zrika from Shechita and Kabbalah? And now we're going to find chumros that apply to both Shechita and Kabbalah that don't apply to Zrika, which is a pella when you think about it in and of itself, because Zrika is the essence of Hakrava, is the Zrika, that's the Mechaper. Because it came to Unos Safam, the Yeshnon Bechatos HaPnimios. What chumros do we find in Shechita and Kabbalah don't apply to Zvicha? Number one, with regard to Kodesh Kodshim, the Zrika and the Kabbalah Saddam has to be in Tzvon HaAzara, which is always the holiest of the holy. And you have cases of what's called a Chatas Pnimis, where the Zrika Saddam is not done on the Mizbeach HaChitzo. Right? We do the Zrika Saddam on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, otherwise known as the Mizbach HaZov, that's in the Heichal. And the Shechita and the Kabbalah will be done and performed in this Chatas HaPnimis in the same way that it's normally done. But Zrika is not in the normal way. It's not in the Mizbeach HaChitza. Again, I would have said intuitively the fact that the Zrika, Saddam, and the Chatas Pnimis has to be inside the Heichal on the Mizbach HaZov, that's a Chumrah. But the Gemara doesn't see it that way. Elam a crow. We now need a pasuk to teach you that the Zrika has to be l'shem hakarban l'shma hazorek omakra hazorek es dam shlomim. Take the word zorek and take the word shlomim to hey Zrika l'shem shlomim. Now, what we haven't yet touched upon, which is going to come up around the bend soon, is halachas Adam, which is a kind of low, sort of humble avoda. Really halacha is just a technicality, to get the dam over to the mizbeach. But in any event, so lichtov Rabbanan v'zrika v'leilach minei. What chumros do we have in zrika? I mean, that's a cinch. With regard to Zrika, if you mess around with Zrika and you're not a Kohen, you're chayiv misa. Albeit misa b'dei shamayim, but you're chayiv misa. On the other hand, Shechita is ksher bizarre, and Kabbalas Hadam, even though it has to be a Kohen, if a Zar would be Makabal Adam, he's not chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. So we see that Zrika is more chomer. Maybe that's why the Torah required Lishma and Zrika. So that justifies why the Torah had to tell me not only Zrika requires Lishma, but even Shechita and Kabbalah require Lishma. Ashkan Kulu Holacha Minayin. What about Halacha? Chite Melech Mikulu. All of the other avodos are much more chomer than Halacha. You can't derive any chumrah from the other avodos to halacha because malakul shekain avodah sheyev shel vatla tomro halacha sheyev shel vatla. If the kohen does the shechita right next to the mizbeach, he doesn't need halacha. He just immediately takes the dam from the shechita and he's zorik it on the mizbeach. So halacha is really a technicality. In fact, later on we're going to have machlokas tanoim. I think it's on Daf Tesvav. I'm not sure between Reb Shimon and Chachamim as to whether or not halacha is an avodah. Ashkechan Kulu. Right. So Tomar Baloch, etc. Elam Akra, we have a pasuk at the very beginning of Sefer Vayikra. Okay, this has to do with the Ola. A carbon Ola, as we know, has to be burnt on the Mizbeach, all of it, all the Avarim. And the Torah says, V'hikriv hakoines hakol, v'hiktir hamizbecha. And what does the word v'hikriv mean over here? Omar Mar, zo holochas evarim la kevesh. Right, there was a kevesh, a ramp that led up to the Mizbeach, and the Kohen, after Kabbalas Adam, had to go up the kevesh, which is called holochas Adam, in order to do this Rikal Gabi Mizbeach. And that's what the word vehikriv means. And it's got to be hamizbecha v'sanyer. We learned in a brisa. Okay, this brisa is referring to a different pasuk. It says v'shachat es ben abakol l'fnei Hashem v'krivo b'nei arda konim sadam v'zarko sadam v'krivu zu kavol sadam. Now, the word v'krivu in this pasuk, which normally refers to holochas adam, is used to refer to zrikas adam. V'apik rachman v'loshen holocha l'meimed holocha lo tafka michlal kabol. So that holochas adam, like the Kabbalas Adam, because holochas Adam is normally derived as the simple pshat of the word ekrivu, and yet here ekrivu means Kabbalas Adam. So we're going to say there's an equation here between Kabbalas Adam and holochas Adam. And just like in holochas in Kabbalas Adam we require lishma, so to require lishma in Kabbalas Adam. Ashkachan shinui kodesh shinui bailam inolan. Okay. You've now come to the conclusion. We have 4 psukim for 4 avodos to teach us that you cannot have shinui kodesh. You have to have l'shem that particular zeva. But what about shinui bailim? How do we know that there's such a psul as shinui bailim? Omra Pinchas Breder of Amyam Akra in Vayikra Zayin. It says, Ubsar Zevach Todas Shlomov. Okay? This is the parsha of Korban Toda, as it says in the pasuk Todas Shlomov. And the word Shlomov is written in the possessive. His Shlomim. Shetei Zvicha L'Shem Toda. So now the Gemara is darshaning that this pasuk al pi pshuto is referring to Shinui Kodesh, because the Zevach is described as Toda, and now the Gemara introduces another methodology of drasha, which is called the Meino Inyan. In Meino Inyan l'Shinui Kodesh, the Nafkal Mehos. We already had psukim from which we derived the psul of Shinui Kodesh is Tnei Le'inyan Shinui Bailim. Frek the Gemara v'hai lahochi hudiyasa. This pasuk is coming to teach you Shinui Bailim. Mi boyle lechasanya. I need it for another drasha. As the Brisa says, ubesar zevach todas shlomov. That's our pasuk here. Abachanan omer mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Bala lamed toda sheshchata l'shem shlomim kshera. Interesting. You may recall that in the Mishnah, when we spoke about Shimon Achi Azariah, that it depends whether it's legava or lenamuch. So from toda to shlomim is considered namuch legava, and shlomim is more kadosh than toda, and therefore shlomim right. So if he shechts toda l'shem shlomim, that's legava, and therefore it's kosher. But if he shechs the opposite shlomim, which is a higher level, shachtan l'shem toda, which is a lower level, like we spoke about b'chor and maser, is psula. Psula here means lo ol l'bayim l'shem chova. Uma hefresh bein zelazeh toda kruya shlomim which means that Toda is a subcategory of Shlomim, but Shlomim is a greater and all-inclusive category. The Ein Shlomim, Kruyim Toda. You won't find that the Torah calls Shlomim by the name Toda, because Shlomim includes many, many different kinds of Shlomim, not just Toda. So in any event, we see that we need this pasuk of Ubasar Zevach Toda Shlomov for another drasha. And the Gemara answers, Anan mizevach kamrinan. Right? You thought I was deriving this from Todas Shlomov. No, Toda Shlomov I need for something else. Of Toda L'Shem Shlomim, Shlom L'Shem Toda, etc. But I'm going to dash it from the word Zevach, because the word Zevach is superfluous in the pasuk. And it's coming to teach me that I need to shech the carbon, which is the zvicha of the carbon toda, for the purpose of a carbon toda. And then I can apply the principle of him eino inyan. I still need the pasuk for a different drasha. In the following brisa, it says chatos v'osham minayin. Okay, so this Rabbosai has to do with how long of a time period do you allot for the eating of the basa, the carbon. And with regard to chatos, you've got 2 days and a night. With regard to osham, you have 1 day and 1 night. Is therefore minayin. Just 1 second. Is chatos v'osham minayin? How do we know that the basa is eaten only on that day and on the night that follows it? I said 2 days. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I meant the day and the night after. It's not the following day, but the night after the day. Is Talmud Lomar Zev. So in any event, we see that the word Zevach we need for the time allotment for the Achilas HaBasar. And therefore, we cannot use the word Zevach to derive the conclusion that you need L'Shem Toda. Im Kain, the Gemara answers that if the word Zevach is only coming to teach me what? That Achatas V'Yoshim should be eaten Yom and Laila Nichtov Kra, the pasuk could have said Todas Ubasar Todas Shlomov Zevach. My Zevach Shma Minotartu. So we have 2 extra words in the pasuk, and they're going to teach me 2 different things. We have 2 different drashas. The word Zevach itself is going to tell me that if you have a chatas and osham, you could eat it not only on the day, but also the night afterwards. But the word Zevach was written before what? Before Todas Shlomov. And if that be the case, it's going to teach me that the Zvich has to be L'Shem Toda. Otherwise, the word Zevach should have come at the end of the pasuk. The word Zevach at the beginning of the pasuk is coming to teach me that the Zevach has to be L'Shem Toda. And then we'll apply the principle of Eino Inyan. Ashkechan Zvicha, okay, fine. You're deriving it from Zvicha, but Shar Avodas Minola, and now we'll go through the same rigmarole that we went through earlier today on Omid Al. V'chi table leiluf mi Zvicha. I'm going to prove to you that there's more of a chumrah in Zvicha than there is in the other avodos. Mal is Zvicha shekaim posel shelo l'shem ochel v'pesach. And therefore, there's a separate chumrah in Shechita, because in Pesach shelo l'shem ochlav, which means for a zaken or chola, it's posel. And other avodos like Kabbalah, Holacha, and Zrika, they don't have this psul in Pesach of a machshava l'shem chola or zaken. So once again, the Torah has to teach you in the other avodos. It's not enough to derive it from shchita, because shchita is chamura. So what's the source for other avodos? Nemros vicha b'shinui kodesh. V'nemros vicha b'shinui bailim. So I think that this is going to be a gzeira shava, if I'm not mistaken. The pasuk says, as we saw earlier, of him zevach shlomim, and that's a case of shinui kodesh. Then we have another pasuk, zevach toda shlomov, and we derive from that pasuk shinui bailim. is therefore going to make the equation ma zvicha mur b'shinui kodesh lo chilka lo chilata bein zvicha l'shar avodos af zvicha mur b'shinui bailim lo techalik bein zvicha l'shar avodos. Tomorrow now we ask the kasha ikol mefrach ma l'shinui kodesh shekain psula begufo. Right, there's a very large ambiguity and discussion about what the Gemara means by psula begufo, as opposed to shini bailim. But I guess right now, at least, the Gemara is holding that when you change the bailim, it's not really a machshava that changes the zevach itself, but shini kodesh, that's changing the zevach itself. That's begufo. Furthermore, number two, yeshno ba'arba avodos. Shebizrika. Zrika is referring to all four avodos. Now, shini bailim only applies to zrika. Why? Because shini bailim means I'm changing the kapara from Ruvain to Shimon, and the kapara is inherent in the zrika. A third pircha, or chumra of shini kodesh, is yeshno liachar bisa. Meaning that even if the bala carbon dies, the carbon will be brought by his yarshim, and it's a chatos l'shem chatos, or an ola l'shem ola, etc., and there's a psul of shinui kodesh. But there's no psul of shini bailim because the bailim have already died. Number four, the chumrah of shinui kodesh is yeshno b'tzibur kibiyachid. In other words, if let's say the tzibur has to bring one kind of carbon and he had in mind for a different carbon, that's going to passel the carbon. But with regard to shini bailim, there's no such thing as a bailim in a carbon tzibur because it belongs to everyone.